How's it going, everybody out there in podcast land? It is time for the latest, greatest episode of The Fortress of Rock. This is episode 169 here on November the 8th, 2024. I am your humble and gracious host, the Ayatollah of rock and roll, the Maestro, Kevin Crane, and as always, first and foremost, very appreciative, very glad to have you aboard for this weekly rock and roll extravaganza to celebrate the music that we absolutely love and cannot live without. First up, as always, segment one is News of the World, our tribute to the late, great Freddie Mercury and Queen. A little bit different this week. Don't really have a lot of straightforward rock and roll news. Don't have any tour news for you. But we've got some interesting music news nonetheless. I'm not going to dig in the muck and the mire now that we're through the election cycle. And thank God all the ads and the billboards and all the TV garbage is done and over with. At least to the height that it was over the last couple months. We're still getting nasty vitriol and awful rhetoric from anybody and everybody, and that includes some prominent rock and rollers, and you figured this was going to happen because Hollywood and celebrities lean one particular way, and when things don't go their way, they whine and they cry like little babies. And I will just say this, the one who really disappoints me is Sebastian Bach, formerly of Skid Row. The stuff he put out there on Twitter after the election results were posted is just a perfect example of what is wrong with our divided country. Why we can't get along is because you put out immature, nasty tweets insulting the entire country because, once again, you didn't get things to go your way, little baby Sebastian. Let's be adults. Let's be mature. Let's hope for the best for the country. Isn't that what we're supposed to do, regardless of who won an election? But there are many pampered celebrities out there who, when they don't get their way, spout off, talk about leaving the country, calling everybody an idiot who didn't vote their way. It's disgusting. It's immature. This is why I am mature enough to separate the artist from the art. I can love Sebastian Bach's music and hate his absolute guts as a disgusting human being. There you go. That's all I'm going to talk about when it comes to the post-election reactions from the rock and roll world. If you want to see a mature reaction, see what Dee Snider, formerly of Twisted Sister, said. Look at his tweets and his reaction. He's a mature man. He's an adult. Despite the fact that things did not go his way, he at least understands how to behave like a member of society. All right, if we don't really talk about the Grammys, if we cared, and it wasn't such a slow news week otherwise, I don't even think we'd be bringing the Grammys up. But this time of year, we're starting to head into the holidays. The touring cycles have slowed down. The new music release cycle has definitely crawled to a virtual standstill. So we'll talk a little bit about the Grammys. Now, first up, the Grammys are moving from CBS, which has been the home, the broadcast television home of the Grammys for over 50 years, But I guess money talks and you know what walks. Disney comes in, writes a big fat check, so now the Grammys move from CBS to ABC, Hulu, Disney Plus on a 10-year deal starting in 2027, which, if you can do the math, takes you through 2036. Yay. I've never cared about the Grammys. I didn't care about the Grammys back when my type of music was prominent and popular back in the 80s, in the early 90s. I didn't care about the Grammys back then. They were clueless back then, and they're even more clueless now. But now the focus for people like you and me has narrowed when it comes to the Grammys, because instead of Song of the Year, Record of the Year actually mattering, for us it doesn't. Rock and roll has pretty much been excluded from the major categories for decades. So we've been pigeonholed, we've been pushed into a corner by the Grammys. And so really there's only 4 categories left for us to care about. Best rock performance, best metal performance, best rock song, and best rock album. And so the nominees are out for the 2025 Grammys. We're just going to loosely review here what we've got when it comes to these nominations. Let's start off with best metal performance, because I'm definitely not going to cover all of these, but I do want to point out something positive and something that I don't like, even though it's a positive. So bear with me. The positive, the unequivocal, great, no bones about it, positive here is that Judas Priest has been nominated for one of their songs off of Invincible Shield. Now, the problem I have with it is they picked arguably the weakest song off of Invincible Shield, Crown of Horns. But again, since rock and roll is the red-headed stepchild of music now in the eyes of the Grammys, we'll take what we can get. Now, the other best metal performance nomination I want to touch on is Metallica. Now, of course, I don't have any problems per se with Metallica, but I don't like how the Grammys will stretch out the eligibility. Number one, their eligibility window is kind of odd and always has been, but they love to stretch it out. So you can actually release an album, and depending on how you quote-unquote release the singles, you can actually have one album's worth of work. The songs within get nominated over multiple years with the Grammys, which to me is just absolutely stupid. If you set boundaries for, we go from, just for an example, if you go from August to July, August of this year to July of next year, that is your release window. And anything released in there, when it comes to an album, that's when the songs and the album really should be in a nomination window. So you pick the 12 months that you want, and that's it. You don't get this. Well, they released the first single the year before, technically, so that gets counted in that year. But then the album came out after the cutoff, so we count the album in the next year, and then it was so popular, or they stretched out releasing the songs as quote-unquote singles, that they released a song after the window closed, so that brings in a third year of eligibility for the work within one single album. And I don't like it. Here's my example. The last Metallica album has already garnered praise. It was already included in the Grammys last year. That, of course, would be 72 Seasons. But somehow, some way, one of the songs from 72 Seasons has made its way into Best Metal Performance. And again, I'm not casting aspersions on Metallica or the song. I'm just saying you got 1 year of eligibility. 1 year. I don't like stretching out one album's worth of material over 3 years, 2 or 3 years of eligibility. It just doesn't seem right. So Screaming Suicide is the track from 72 Seasons that the Grammys have decided to nominate for Best Metal Performance, even though last year was really when 72 Seasons was a valid contender. Yes, I'm bitter. I don't like the Grammys. I like rules. I like the rules to be enforced. Very little exceptions. All right, so Best Rock Performance. We'll go from metal to rock. Once again, let's look at the flaws with the Grammys. Now, you guys know by now, I don't care one whit about the Black Keys, but for some reason, the Grammys, Rolling Stone, everybody loves the Black Keys except for you and me. Remember, they had to cancel their last tour because of low ticket sales and had to revamp it and change it to much smaller venues. Okay, so they've got Beautiful People, Stay High is nominated for Best Rock Performance. The American Dream is Killing Me, Green Day, another band. They've kind of worn out their welcome with me. But The American Dream is Killing Me by Green Day, nominated. I like this one. This is the one I'm rooting for. Dark Matter, Pearl Jam. Definitely rooting for Dark Matter in this field. Not the best Pearl Jam album or song, but still very, very good, especially when you compare it to the field. And then Lazy. This tells me that these people do not listen to new music as much as they like to think they do, as cool as they think they are, because, St. Vincent gets nominated, and this band from this pseudo-punk band, I guess, I did a little research on them, called Idols, IDLES, all caps. How pretentious is that for a punk band? So they get nominated. The cool factor, we don't want to give all the nominees to the older folk like you and me. So you got the Black Keys, you got Green Day, you've got Pearl Jam, Idols, St. Vincent, and then this is where I say laziness comes into play. The Beatles, Now and Then. Are you really going to tell me you couldn't find anything better out there? I know we're always talking about the scarcity of new releases and new music, but you couldn't find anything better out there than a remastered, AI-enhanced, quote-unquote, new track from the Beatles. It's not a bad song. I'm fine with the song, but it just doesn't seem appropriate or right for that type of song to gain and garner all these accolades when there are actual bands with all members still alive who put out new music without AI help. This is, again, the Grammys, as they've always been, lazy, and dumb. They don't do their research. They think they're cool, but they're not. Remember, these are the people that gave a Best Metal Performance Grammy to Jethro Tull over Metallica. One of the most egregious mistakes in rock and roll history. So then we move on to from Best Rock Performance to Best Rock Song. Because, of course, the performance is supposed to shine a spotlight on the band itself, the performer himself or herself, whereas Best Rock Song is all about the craft of songwriting. And there's really not a lot of difference from what I can tell here between Best Rock Performance and Best Rock Song. The Black Keys, once again, for Beautiful People Stay High. Broken Man, which is the song for St. Vincent that was nominated in Best Rock Performance. Dark Matter, Pearl Jam, another repeat. They chose a different Green Day song. Dilemma is the Green Day song chosen for Best Rock Song, as opposed to The American Dream is Killing Me for Best Rock Performance. And then, once again, another repeat from this Idols band, the song Gift Horse, nominated for both Best Rock Performance and Best Rock Song. So there's only one variation. Now, of course, the Beatles are not included in Best Rock Song, but the other five from Best Rock Performance, with the exception of Green Day switching songs, are identical. Then finally, we'll get off this Grammy stuff. Trust me, like I said, a very, very light week in rock news. Best Rock Album. Things are a little bit better here. Things are a little bit different here. Not a ton, but a little bit different. And I like what we've got here. We've got 7 nominees for Best Rock Album, and I like a lot of them. Happiness Bastards from the Black Crowes, which will definitely, I would say, without a lot of new music coming up between now and the end of the year, will definitely be in my top 5 for Best Album of 2024. Happy to see that. Saviors by Green Day. To me, another underwhelming effort from them, but again, we'll take it. Dark Matter from Pearl Jam. I've already expressed how I feel about that album, although I will not root for Dark Matter over Happiness Bastards. And I will also not root for Dark Matter over No Name from Jack White. That should be the favorite, in my humble opinion, as it's in contention for Best Album of the Year here on the Fortress of Rock. Definitely vying for that #1 year-end spot. And then the Rolling Stones. Normally I would say this is probably lazy, but Hackney Diamonds was a very, very good album. I have no problem with Hackney Diamonds being nominated for Best Rock Album. Then the other 2 slots, again, ooh, look how cool and edgy we are as Grammy voters. Romance by Fontaine's DC. Okay. And then once again, that Idols band makes an appearance with Tang. Tangk is the name of the album. Whatever, you're just too cool for me, guys. You're way too cool for me. Like I said, I did a little research on this band Idols, and I have noticed they have made absolutely zero impact in America on the album sales charts. Zero impact. But somehow they're so phenomenal that they land in every rock category for the 2025 Grammys. So there you go. Like I said, this is where the most interesting music comes into play in Best Rock Album, because we've got the Black Crowes, we've got Green Day, we've got Pearl Jam, the Rolling Stones, and Jack White. So that is pretty solid. That's pretty solid. But remember, in the old days, again, going back to the 80s, 70s, early 90s, those would have been contending for Album of the Year. Not Best Rock Album, Album of the Year. That's how much things have changed. And in my opinion, fallen, regressed over the last 3 decades. All right, enough with this Grammy garbage. Like I said, only reason we did that is because it's a very slow news week. A couple other things, and then we move on to a great breakdown segment. Quincy Jones, please take a moment to mourn the passing of one of the greatest, if not the greatest, music producers of all time. Of course, everybody really remembers him for Thriller, which is not fair because he did so much other great, great work in the world of music. So, thoughts and prayers to the family and friends of Quincy Jones. Eddie Murphy, a little bit of media news outside of the music realm. We'll talk here about movies, and then we'll talk a little bit of television. Eddie Murphy is going to portray George Clinton in an upcoming Parliament Funkadelic biopic. That should be pretty interesting. That should be very, very cool. It will be directed by Bill Condon, who worked with Eddie Murphy before on Dreamgirls. And then finally, a man who I have lost so much respect for. I know, you're sitting there. If you've listened to me for the last few years since we started this podcast, I think over 3 years now. But there are certain people in the music industry I have zero respect for, or very, very little respect for. Now, this particular gentleman, he's not down at the level of Roger Waters or Neil Young, but I was a huge fan of the Police growing up. Huge fan of the Police growing up. And when the Police broke up and Sting went off on his own, wasn't really thrilled, but I said, okay, let's see what he does on his own without Stuart Copeland and Andy Summers. And there was some very good stuff throughout the years, throughout the decades for Sting. But I don't think his solo work has ever come close to matching what he did with the Police. And I'm not going to bore you once again with talking about the group dynamic and how the solo artists go off with their egos, wanting to make all the money for themselves and not split it 3 ways or split it 4 ways. But they lose the energy, they lose the vital nature of great music by doing that. The collaboration among musicians is almost lost. Of course, I mentioned earlier this year that Sting has formed a new power trio called Sting 3.0. Couldn't just call up Andy Summers and Stuart Copeland and get the Police back together. He had to bring in a new drummer and a new guitarist because he probably gets to pay them a lot less. But now Sting has sunk to a new level. I can't stand reality shows. I've never mentioned that here on the Fortress of Rock before. I hate reality shows. I don't like American Idol. I don't like America's Got Talent. And I sure as heck don't like The Voice. The people that win these competitions might go off and make a decent living and sometimes become huge, huge recording artists like Carrie Underwood. Of course, Jennifer Hudson did not win American Idol, but has gone on to unbelievable levels of fame and fortune. The closest we've had in rock and roll is, of course, Chris Daughtry, and even his star burned out fairly quickly. He's still out there, I know, he's still touring, but I'm pretty sure his level of popularity is not nearly as high as it was in those few years after American Idol. But Sting is going to join The Voice. Season 26 of The Voice as what they call a mega mentor. Ugh. Ugh. Just when I thought I couldn't drain any more out of my Sting respect pool, Sting has found a way to somehow evaporate a little bit more out of it. And like I said, he's still not at the bottom of the barrel yet. He's not down there with Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, and those guys. But he keeps going like this, he's going to get down there. Alright, so that'll do it for News of the World. Let's move on to Breakdown, our tribute to Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Of course, this is where we review the best in new songs, new albums, and concerts each and every week, because we've got to keep live music going. We've got to keep new music going. So, this past Wednesday night, November the 6th, 2024, probably would not have gone to this show if it wasn't for the fact that REO Speedwagon had all this infighting come up out of nowhere a few months ago. And Kevin Cronin made this, sounded to me like a unilateral decision to stop touring with REO Speedwagon. Basically disbanding the band. I won't get into all the gory details because we've talked about them in the past, but the final two members still around and willing to play from REO Speedwagon's classic High Infidelity lineup. Of course, Gary Richrath has passed away. Alan Gratzer and Neil Doughty have retired. So Bruce Hall and Kevin Cronin were who were left. But Bruce Hall had back surgery, got cleared by his doctors to come back out and play and tour. Kevin Cronin didn't like it, didn't think that Bruce Hall looked right. I know, it's still bizarre to hear me say that again. But Kevin Cronin didn't feel Bruce Hall looked right, couldn't move around the stage well enough to suit Kevin Cronin, so things got uglier and uglier, it sounds like. And Cronin just said, then fine, we'll just stop touring as REO Speedwagon. So he's going to go out on the road solo from now on, starting in 2025, of course playing the songs of REO Speedwagon. Isn't that convenient? But we've got little less than 2 months to go of REO Speedwagon in its current permutation. Grand Rapids, Michigan, November the 6th. I got to see REO Speedwagon for what will be one of the last shows ever, maybe, for REO. You know how cynical I am about these performers, these bands. If somebody pops up with a big check in a couple years, I am sure that Kevin Cronin will take it, make amends with Bruce Hall, maybe bring Neil Doughty out of retirement. The one thing, though, with REO Speedwagon is they're older. As Kevin Cronin stressed during this show, he's in his 70s. Says he feels great, but I think it's gotten to the point where it's just not REO Speedwagon anymore. I'm sure he wants to think it is because he thinks he's the be-all, end-all of REO. He's the one that changed them from that solid Midwestern rock band that we grew to know and love in the 70s, and then kind of turned them into a pop rock juggernaut in the 80s with ballads, sometimes very terrible ballads. But with REO and their age and the fact that they're really fractured in terms of who's alive, who's retired, this could definitely be the end for REO Speedwagon. Now, opening for REO, and we'll just cover this for a couple minutes at most, because this is the third time I've seen Loverboy in the last 15 or 16 months. Loverboy opened for REO Speedwagon this past Wednesday night, and I've got no problems with Loverboy. I am always willing to admit that Get Lucky was one of the top 10 albums for me personally in the 80s. First album was fantastic as well. I never really had a problem with many of the albums that came after. They got a little bit less edgy, a little bit more, there were the ballads, of course. Especially Mike Reno would go off on his own and do some really, really terrible, awful ballads for movies. Those wonderful duets. Wasn't Heaven in Your Eyes one of them? I do believe. But yeah, the Loverboy music after the first 3 or 4 albums turned more into product. You weren't getting stuff even with just a little bit of edge, like The Kid Is Hot Tonight or Hot Girls in Love. Still very well crafted pop rock tunes, but there's a little tiny bit of that 80s misogyny in Hot Girls in Love. A little bit of cynicism in The Kid Is Hot Tonight. But where will he be tomorrow? So I don't have any issues per se with Loverboy. It's just that now, again, I've seen him 3 times in the last year and a half, and they don't change their set list. They're very competent still. Mike Reno, despite the fact he has put on a ton of weight over the years, still sounds pretty good. The band overall still sounds solid, tight, musically. But they just, if you go to see them for the first time ever, you're gonna be very happy. But then you go see them the second time and you go, okay, still good, but nothing's changed. And then for me, the third time in the last year and a half, I go, okay, it's fine. I love all these songs, but could we change it up just a little bit every once in a while? So the set list for Loverboy. Loverboy got to play for almost an hour. 9 songs. And as I mentioned, this is probably the exact same set list that I discussed with you kids a few months ago when they opened for Sammy Hagar. We go with Notorious to start, and then the Lucky Ones, Queen of the Broken Hearts, Take Me to the Top, The Kid Is Hot Tonight, Loving Every Minute of It, Hot Girls in Love, and then they end, of course, with the 1-2 punch of Turn Me Loose and Working for the Weekend. Now, just a couple observations. I personally always kind of like Take Me to the Top. Wasn't one of their biggest hits, but I'm glad they still play it. It seems to gain a little bit of energy live. The Kid is Hot Tonight, arguably my favorite Loverboy song. Um, I'm fascinated always, every time I see Loverboy in concert, with the crowd reaction to Lovin' Every Minute of It. That seems to be the song that really gets everybody fired up. I would say it is arguably on the same level as Working for the Weekend in terms of the crowd reaction. And that kind of puzzles me a little bit. I just don't remember Lovin' Every Minute of It being that popular. I know it was a big hit, but I just don't recall it being that huge. Then, of course, Turn Me Loose is always awesome as well. So again, Loverboy, competent, solid, meat and potatoes rock and roll. Can't complain, except I will because I want to hear a few different songs. They always lead off with Notorious, and Notorious doesn't do it for me. I wouldn't mind if they dug into dug into their catalog a little bit and shifted something up to the front and maybe put in a deeper track later on. Queen of the Broken Hearts doesn't do much for me either. But I'm nitpicking, and I'm going to nitpick with REO Speedwagon as well as we move on to the headliner. So REO Speedwagon, 14 songs, that includes the encore. A little bit disappointed in the length of the set. Again, it seems like doing a little research, REO Speedwagon doesn't do much in terms of changing up their set list from night to night. And again, I know Kevin Cronin made a point during the show of saying, oh, I'm in my mid-70s. I still feel great. But when you consider the fact that this set clocked in at just under 90 minutes, that sounds to me like somebody who's feeling it and can't put on a 2-hour show anymore. Because there's definitely more than enough material in the REO Speedwagon catalog to play a full 2-hour show. Especially when you're calling it quits at the end of the year. And another bizarre thing, Kevin Cronin never referenced that at all during the show. In fact, towards the end, he was acting like, hey, we'll see you next time. We'll do this again. I'm paraphrasing, but asked my friends afterwards, I said, what did you think of that? Didn't acknowledge the fact that they're shutting things down as a touring unit. He doesn't acknowledge it, and then he basically says, hey, we'll see you next time around. And my friends said, well, it's probably just force of habit, just something that he's used to saying after every show for decades and decades. Okay. So that kind of took a little bit of the gravitas of the situation away from the show. Where most of the crowd kind of knew that this is one of the last shows for REO Speedwagon, yet it was never acknowledged. We didn't get a 2-hour blowout show to honor the history of REO Speedwagon and say, okay, we know we're coming to an end here in a few months, so let's give you fans on this last run everything we've got. Just like Loverboy, it came off a little bit stiff and manufactured. Now, this is going to make me sound like a hypocrite, but despite all that, they still managed to play virtually every song you would have wanted to hear. Just like I said, just under a shade under 90 minutes. Played a lot from High Infidelity, but they went back to their 70s stuff. Stayed away for the most part from the later era REO Speedwagon, which I was very thankful for. So let's run through the 14 songs here real quick from REO Speedwagon at Van Andel Arena in Grand Rapids, Michigan on November the 6th, 2024. We start off, of course, with the great High Infidelity track, Don't Let 'Em Go. Then we move on to Take It on the Run, Keep Pushing. Then I think this was the first slight misstep of the night. And this is where I'm not a big Kevin Cronin fan and his little mushy, mellow tendencies. They decided to play Live Every Moment, which is a nice little mid-tempo song, but to me it's very generic. Live every moment, love every day, because before you know it, your precious time slips away. Okay, that's a recurring theme throughout rock and roll history. Not one of my favorite REO songs. Let's put it that way. Then we dive back into High Infidelity with Tough Guys, and I love the fact that even though it's obviously pre-recorded, that they still play, just like they do on the album, they still play that little snippet from The Little Rascals before the song. That's just classic. Then they decided to go with a deep track off of High Infidelity. And I know that sounds odd because High Infidelity was such a monumental touchstone for rock and roll in the early 80s that I know almost every song was played on the radio back when they did that sort of stuff, when AOR was prevalent and you actually got real disc jockeys who were allowed to play the songs they wanted to. So big hit albums like High Infidelity or Journey's Escape, Billy Squier's Don't Say No, they would go 6 or 7 songs deep on the radio with those songs, with those albums and the songs that were on them, even ones that were never released as singles. So in a very odd, this is my second misstep of the night, by the way. Only two when it comes to the actual set list. First one was Live Every Moment. Second one, I Wish You Were There. And I do believe he said that's the closing song off of High Infidelity. I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. And again, this is one of the very few songs on High Infidelity that was never played on the radio. So I thought that was a very odd, weird choice. And again, another more mellow song in the catalog from REO Speedwagon. And of course, one that I'm sure was all Kevin Cronin's doing. He did mention at one point during the show, he did not acknowledge the entire band, the classic band, the classic lineup from High Infidelity, outside of Gary Richrath. He did pay tribute to Gary Richrath, but very interesting, no mention of Bruce Hall or the two retired members, Alan Gratzer and Neil Doughty. So then after I Wish You Were There, the rest of the set is very, very solid, spectacular, dare I say, outside of one more song. Outside of one more song. But I knew it was coming. It's my bathroom song for REO Speedwagon. But Music Man was next. And Music Man's one of their 70s songs. Love it. Great, great song. Then, yes, we got Can't Fight This Feeling, which I still, to this day, it makes my ears bleed. It is such a bad song. And I cannot believe it is the biggest hit in the career of REO Speedwagon, with all the great, tremendous songs they've got. That to me, it's juvenile. To me, it's an immature, juvenile little love song. And I'm admitting I'm not the biggest ballad guy in the world, but there are great power ballads out there. My number one all time will always be Poison's Every Rose Has Its Thorn. But this is like the exact polar opposite to me of Every Rose. So everybody else was standing up during this one. I had already ducked out to the bathroom earlier. So I just sat there. Everybody else was standing. I decided to give my old tired feet a break from standing, because everybody stood through the entire set for REO and most of Loverboy. So then after Can't Fight This Feeling, then we get Son of a Poor Man. That's the song where Kevin Cronin paid tribute to Gary Richrath, acknowledged that song was very autobiographical for Richrath. Great, great song again from their 70s run. Then they played Golden Country. Love, love Golden Country. Now, the interesting thing about this is when I was doing my research, it doesn't seem like they play Golden Country, the one song out of this set, as I mentioned, seemed like they're very fixed in their set list each and every night. Just like Loverboy, they don't change it up a lot. But it seemed to me that Golden Country was the one song that we got Wednesday night that a lot of other cities don't get anymore. So I was very appreciative of that, because Golden Country, again, another great 70s REO song. I'm not a big fan of the hippie stuff, but Golden Country, even though the lyrics do tend to delve into hippie territory and hippie topics, it's still a tremendous song. A tremendous song. And they did a great job with it. Then, of course, we close out with the 4 songs that you knew they were going to end up playing in some order. Time for Me to Fly. Then my personal favorite live song of all time, Riding the Storm Out, closed out the main set. And then they went off stage for about 30 seconds, came back for the encore, which of course consisted of Keep On Loving You and Roll With the Changes. So for all my complaining and my whining and my moaning about, could have dealt with another 20-25 minutes at least of music, would have shifted these songs, would have taken these songs out. For example, Bruce Hall's not there, so of course they're not going to play Back on the Road Again, which is his song. Bruce Hall's on vocals on that song, but that song is so great. Kind of missed having that in the set. What's wrong with playing Keep the Fire Burning? I don't understand why they've basically cast that song aside, when to me it's just as good as half the stuff they played in this set on November the 6th. And there's plenty of other stuff they could have pulled out. Back again, a little more in the 70s, you could have played 157 Riverside Avenue. They could have played a little bit longer, and they could have picked a few better songs than what they did. But this is what you get, in my opinion, with Kevin Cronin now being the be-all, end-all, Lord God leader of REO Speedwagon, with nobody outside of his hired guns to really push him. So that being said, REO Speedwagon, Loverboy, a very competent, solid night of rock and roll. For all my complaints, I'm very picky about my music. You guys listening to this know that. Without a doubt, you know that. So I will always be fair. I will always be nitpicky. Nothing is perfect. Nothing is ever perfect. But this was a very solid, great night of rock and roll. I was very appreciative, very happy to see REO Speedwagon one last time. REO will always hold a place of fondness in my heart because that was the first great rock and roll show I ever saw in high school. Wasn't my first. Billy Squier was my first, and I'm not trying to disparage Billy Squier, but I just remember more from the REO Speedwagon show. Red Ryder opened at the Notre Dame ACC. This was back again in the early 80s. Just an unbelievable show. You had a great opening act. We had awesome seats back when you could afford, even in high school, to pay for awesome floor seats right in front of the speakers. And then that was back in the day when they played Riding the Storm Out, they actually had flash pots and they were blowing stuff up, which I guess nobody does anymore because it's frowned upon. It can cause hearing issues for the snowflakes out there. Something. I don't know. But they don't do that anymore. So now you get some smoke flumes going up in the air. That disappoints me too, yes. But again, overall, very, very good night of music. If you got a chance here, late November or into December, if you're anywhere near where REO Speedwagon is playing, I think their final show is in Las Vegas. Of course it is. But they are playing some areas, I believe, in the Midwest. About a dozen more shows, I think, before that Vegas gig. So definitely go out and check them out one final time. All right, so we got 2 new songs for you as well here on Breakdown. Tremonti, the 3rd release from the upcoming album, The End Will Show Us How, coming out in January 2025. The 3rd single is One More Time. It took me about half a dozen listens before this one really started to grow on me and dig its way through my ear into my brain. It's a little more, it's very heavy. I'm gonna use 2 words here that don't seem to mesh well, but it's the best way I can describe my reaction to One More Time. Is it's heavy but subtle. You've really got to listen to it multiple times, as I said, to really start to pull out the lyrics and the great lyrics and the different musical tempo shifts and changes within the song. But I will say one more time, it is heavy. So this is definitely one of the heavier Tremonti songs. But it stacks up right up there with the first 2 singles. So I'm really looking forward to the new album. 3 songs in right now, and they're different enough where we could be looking at an early contender when it comes out in 2025 for next year's Fortress of Rock 2025 album of the year. Looking that far ahead already. But got to remember, kids, calendar's less than 2 months away from shifting. 2024 is almost over and done. So definitely check out One More Time from Tremonti. Of course, when we were at the REO concert, they were Van Andel Arena, by the way, my favorite indoor arena of anywhere within driving distance, reasonable driving distance that we go for concerts. Easily my favorite. But they run across the video display that runs around the stadium, the arena, in between the lower bowl and the upper bowl. They run, obviously, little teasers for who's coming in concert, what events they're having in the coming weeks and months. And I saw that coming up here in about a week and a half, triple bill. I'm saying this because of Mark Tremonti. Mammoth, WVH, Three Doors Down, and Creed. And even though I am not, you guys know I love Mammoth WVH. Absolutely would go see them in a heartbeat. Three Doors Down, I'm not the biggest fan of. I've seen them in concert once. That's enough for me. They have 3 or 4 really cool songs, but it's the other stuff that other people seem to love that I don't really gravitate towards. And then I could say the same thing about Creed. There was a time, yes, when I thought Creed was pretty cool, but I could also tell that there was something off with them. Like, there were times when they sounded like they wanted to be a Pearl Jam knockoff, and then there were times when they went too poppy. Higher always comes to mind. Higher is one of the most overrated. For as much as I think Mark Tremonti is a guitar god, the guitar riff in Higher sounds to me like fingernails being drawn across a blackboard, is how awful I think that guitar riff is. It just boggles my mind with that song, how Mark Tremonti is the guy playing that awful, awful guitar riff. But anyway, that's a little bit of an aside, just bringing in a little bit more about Mark Tremonti and the REO Speedwagon concert. So one more song before we get in the rock and roll DeLorean and move on with Doc Brown to I Want to Go Back. In a way, we're kind of going back a little bit with this last song here on Breakdown. We're doing the third song from the upcoming U2 album, How to Reassemble an Atomic Bomb. I've already told you guys in the past about this. This is a collection of tracks that did not make the cut for How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. Very, very intrigued, very excited now about this album, as we're also, just like with Tremonti, 3 songs in for How to Reassemble an Atomic Bomb. The third song out is Happiness. And this is going to sound a little redundant because I'm going to praise this in the context of the first 2 songs, just like I did with Tremonti. Happiness is very, very good. Very good, and it stands right up there with the first 2 songs that were released. Of course, Picture of You, Country Mile. This had to be I won't say the last, but one of the last extremely fruitful creative periods for U2, where you were able to put out what many people, myself included, consider their big comeback album after a years of experimentation and the Zoo TV and pop, and then they decided to bring things back to more of their classic sound from the Joshua Tree, that era. But to have that album, here we go. We've got our songs cut and dried. This is the version we're putting out. This is the sequence. Put it out. Huge, massive hit. And now we're hearing these songs, 3 so far, that are all tremendous, that they thought weren't worthy of being on the album. So again, had to be an extremely amazing creative period for Bono and the Edge writing songs and the entire band for performing. And this is why I will always say, give us what's in the vaults to any and every band. Give us what's in the vaults. We'll be the judge. We're your fans. We love the work you've done. Why wouldn't we love the scraps, the things that you left on the cutting room floor? So happiness, a very, very positive breakdown segment for the most part here, kids. Very positive. REO Speedwagon, Loverboy, yes, I nitpicked, but overall, very good show. Third single from Tremonti, very good. Third release from U2, and How to Reassemble an Atomic Bomb, excellent as well. So you know what that means. Breakdown is over. It is time to stroll over to the rock and roll garage here at the Fortress of Rock. Hop in the rock and roll DeLorean as Doc Brown gets it fired up to 1.21 gigawatts. We're going to travel back in time. Check out some classic album releases, anniversaries, birthdays, important moments in rock and roll history. It is time for segment 3. I want to go back, our tribute to the late, great Eddie Money. All right, so while Doc Brown is getting us out into the time stream, getting everything ready to go, lining us up with the appropriate months and years, and of course day will be November the 8th. But before we do that, we got to take care of business. You found us somewhere. Once again, very appreciative and thankful for that. But you have options and you have choices, just like we did this past Tuesday. I wish we had more. You have more when it comes to where you can listen to the Fortress of Rock. New episodes, of course, each and every Friday evening. You can go back, delve into the archives. Really, outside of the current news, these episodes age very well. My reviews don't get old. Even if an album came out 3 or 4 years ago, the review of it is still going to be interesting and fresh. Not trying to toot my own horn, but toot toot. So you can delve into the archives. Just talking about the archives, feel free to dig into our archives. It's all out there for you. But new episodes, of course, every Friday evening on Spotify, Pocket Casts, Apple, iHeartRadio, Overcast, Amazon Music, Castbox, Audible, and Good Pods. And of course, we do have a Facebook page, another place where you can hook up to all of our episodes. You might have to do a little bit of scrolling, a lot more than you would do with the actual podcast platforms I just mentioned, but you can still do it on Facebook. But the stuff on Facebook you really want to pay attention to also happens every weekend. Right around the time we drop our Friday night brand new episode of the Fortress of Rock, we also drop the Weekend Rock Project. The Weekend Rock Project, I give you a word, a band, an idea, a concept, and you need to come back with your favorite, your best rock songs that fit that concept, that idea, that word, that performer, whatever the qualifications might be. Not sure what this week's is going to be yet. I've still got a little bit of time here to come up with something as I polish up this latest episode before dropping it on you. But that will be out Friday night, and every Friday night, right along the same time as the brand new Fortress of Rock episode drops. And then, of course, New Music Sunday, every Sunday afternoon, this time of year, right before kickoff of the 1 o'clock NFL games, because that's my schedule. Nobody's going to mess with my NFL football viewing on Sunday. But I will not neglect you, and I will always have a brand new song, a brand new video from YouTube, whether it's a visualizer video, a lyric video, or a fully produced video of a new song that's been out only a week or two in most cases. This type of year, we might get a little desperate. We'll see how things go. And I don't know right now what the song is going to be for New Music Sunday. Could be Tremonti. I do believe I used U2 last week, actually. So, Happiness was last weekend's song for New Music Sunday. But we'll find something cool. We'll find something fun for you each and every Sunday, early afternoon, on the Facebook page for the Fortress of Rock. Then, of course, I also have to acknowledge my sources for some of my ideas for stories in News of the World and here in I Want to Go Back. 3 main sources. 2 I use each and every week. 1 I use when there is news about the greatest band of all time, Van Halen. UltimateClassicRock.com, ThisDayInMusic.com, and the Van Halen Newsdesk.com. Alright, let's get into I Want to Go Back. Start delving into the history of rock and roll. Let's start off with just a few anniversaries here on November the 8th. November the 8th, 2008. One of the few rock and roll bands that has been able to survive the last 30 years, the changes, the shifts in pop culture and music, whereas a lot of other bands from the 70s and the 80s, even the early 90s, have fallen by the wayside, and SoundScan and streaming and how numbers are calculated and popularity is quantified. AC/DC has survived it all. They put out a new album, somehow, some way, it sells. As I said, one of the few rock bands that has survived all the changes throughout the decades. Hoping for a 2025 U.S. summer tour. Hoping. Fingers crossed. But on this day, November the 8th, 2008, Black Ice from AC/DC, the #1 album in the U.S. Like I said, they have survived all of it. I'm not trying to insult them, but they're like the cockroaches of hard rock. They will survive and they will not go away until they are ready to. And I love them for that. On this day, November the 8th, 1975, David Bowie made his first United States television appearance on Cher's CBS show, performing Fame. And then finally, in anniversaries, November the 8th, 1971, arguably Led Zeppelin's greatest album ever, technically untitled. Some people call it Zoso, some people say Four Symbols. I think the majority of us just call it Led Zeppelin IV. Led Zeppelin IV was released on this day in 1971. Now we move on to birthdays. November the 8th, 1958, the birthday for Terry Lee Mayall, drummer for Adam and the Ants. Born on this day, November the 8th, 1957, Paul Thompson, guitarist for The Cure. Now, there's some dispute on this birthday. I've seen some people say 1959. I think, based on what I've looked at, it's 1956. November the 8th, 1956. Birthday for Alan Frew, vocalist for Glass Tiger. Born on this day, November the 8th, 1954. One-hit wonder. Somehow her legend has grown and made her so much more important. I'm sorry, so much more important than I think she is in the annals of rock and roll history. Chuck E's in Love. Ricky Lee Jones, born on this day in 1954. Not trying to rip on the women here. Do not think I'm ripping on the women here. I'm simply, in these particular cases, trying to be a little bit more honest. Ricky Lee Jones, I thought a little bit overrated for being a one-hit wonder. Now, this woman was not a one-hit wonder, but I think her influence vastly overblown as well. Born on this day, November the 8th, 1949, Bonnie Raitt was born. Let's give them something to talk about. I think I would take Chuck E's in Love over that song. I do. I really do. Then finally, born on this day, November the 8th, 1945, Don Murray, drummer for the Turtles. And that's going to do it for I Want to Go Back. Quick little jaunt out into the rock and roll time stream. So Doc Brown's going to bring us into the rock and roll garage once again. We're going to close things up, pull up the drawbridge over the moat. I'm going to wander back into the studio to finish things up with segment 4 here on Friday evening, November the 8th, 2024. It's time to wrap it up. Our tribute to the fabulous Thunderbirds, Kim Wilson and the boys. Now, I've alluded to this a couple times throughout this podcast. When we get into November and people start focusing on the holidays, we see a lot of greatest hits packages, obviously Christmas albums, live albums getting released, not a lot of brand new studio music. So that's going to make things a little bit tricky here for us at the Fortress of Rock for the next couple months. Now, the good news is that normally we hit January and February, we see a glut, a nice run of new music. We know for sure Tremonti's got his new album coming out, his band. So I'm expecting an announcement for at least one or two other releases in November, or in January and February. But here in November, things tend to slow down. So we're going to play it a little bit loosey-goosey here when it comes to talking about future reviews in our breakdown segment. Got a couple songs still that we have not reviewed yet that will be coming up. One for sure. One's a maybe. One of my favorite smaller bands, the Black Moods, has got a new song out called Passion. We'll definitely be reviewing that within the next couple weeks. Still trying to figure out if I want to subject myself to Rick Springfield. I say that based solely on his last effort, his last album, which I thought was way over the top, goofy, experimental, and weird. So I got to listen to this new song, Lose Myself, to see if he's continuing down that path or he's maybe jumping back to his old school straight ahead rock sound that we all came to know and love again in the 80s. Now, in terms of specifics for episodes, the next 3 episodes, episode 170, 171, 172, November the 15th, November the 22nd, and Black Friday, November the 29th. Haven't set anything in stone yet. But I will tell you that some of those live albums I referenced will probably come into play. I'll have to bend and stretch our rules for the Fortress of Rock just a little bit. I normally don't like to review live albums. Definitely do not review greatest hits albums. But in some way, shape, or form, we're going to be reviewing things like Tears for Fears, Songs for a Nervous Planet. Now, I might just review the 4 brand new studio tracks. I might jump onto Hulu, Disney Plus, and watch Bruce Springsteen's Road Diary. We've got Nickelback's live album from Nashville coming out here soon. We've still got Smashing Pumpkins, Agori Mori Me sitting out there to review. The Allman Brothers, that massive 3 CD set, their final concert. That would be a beast to try to review. Not that I wouldn't love every minute of it, but we shall see how that goes. So somehow, some way, some combination of those albums, maybe even we will do an overview of Motley Crue's canceled EP. We never really did that, even though technically we reviewed all 3 songs at one point or another that are on that EP. We'll figure it out. We always figure it out. And then we get back in 4 weeks, back into live music. I'll be recording the Black Friday episode on November the 29th early because that night. We've tried to do it every year for the past decade. Now, COVID messed things up for a couple years, but our annual trek down to Indianapolis on Black Friday to see Jackal at the 8 Seconds Saloon is back on. That will be episode 173 on December the 6th, the review of that show. The show is on Black Friday. The following Friday, episode 173, we will review Jackal for you. Then, of course, we are about 5-6 weeks away from starting to put together our year-end lists for 2024. Our top 5 songs, our top 5 albums, our top 5 concerts for 2024. Those will be coming within a couple weeks after that Jackal review. And just to give you a little taste, going out even 5 weeks. Episode 174, dropping on December the 13th, will be our review of Night Ranger live at the Lerner Theater in Elkhart, Indiana. The final concert review of 2024 here on the Fortress of Rock. All right, one last thing to take care of before we bid you adieu. Our tribute to the Billboard charts. Back when they were cool, back when they were good, back when they actually meant something, back when they didn't disparage, discourage, and ignore rock and roll. So I took it upon myself at the start of this year to start giving you a little condensed version, our own version here on the Fortress of Rock, of the classic Billboard charts. So we give you every week the Fortress of Rock #1 album and the top songs of the week. #1 album this week. I went with Tears for Fears, Songs for a Nervous Planet, which, as I mentioned, is mostly live, very reasonably priced 2 CD package, by the way, with 4 new songs. I'm still debating, again, whether or not to review the whole thing for you or just the 4 new songs. I don't really know if you want me to rehash a live version of Shout or a live version of Everybody Wants to Rule the World. But that has been the album I've been listening to the most here the past week. I have a feeling now we're going to get some... Jerry Cantrell's going to pop back into the picture. Miles Kennedy, recent releases, I will start to bring those back up again, throw those back into the CD player here in the studio. So don't be shocked if we start to see some albums from the last 3 or 4 months get some more plays and ascend to the top of the Fortress of Rock charts once again. Soul Asylum, another one. Our top songs of the week here on the Fortress of Rock. Yes, top songs. I could pick a number one song, but I don't want to. I find it easier to pick 2 songs every week. The 2 songs that I have liked the most, that I have listened to the most over the past 7 days. We'll stick with Tears for Fears. Now, this song was released as a single a couple months ago. I've been listening to, as I mentioned, the entire album a lot here over the last 7 days, but this song is really growing on me. It's a little mellow, a little jazzy, but Astronaut by Tears for Fears is one of our top songs this week on the Fortress of Rock. And a song we just reviewed here in Breakdown. Tremonti, One More Time, third release off the upcoming album, The End Will Show Us How. So there you go, kids. Tears for Fears at the top of both charts with Tremonti on the song chart. Astronaut, Tears for Fears, One More Time, Tremonti, top songs. Songs for a Nervous Planet by Tears for Fears, the top album this week here on the Fortress of Rock, and that will do it. Wrap things up here. Call it a night. Settle down and relax for a great fall weekend. I hope you have a great weekend as well. Be safe. Listen to some great music, some new music. You can always drop a comment and let me know if you've discovered something you think I should be checking out. More than willing to listen to new music. We'll do this again in 7 days, of course. As the sun rises, the sun sets every 7 days. You will get a brand new episode of the Fortress of Rock. Take care. Love the one you're with. Until next Friday, I'm the Maestro. You are who you are. Peace out.